What is sacrificial living? My guest last week on the podcast just threw this sentence off. One of her missions is to eradicate sacrificial living for entrepreneurs. I would suggest that we could eliminate sacrificial living for corporate folks too. And so on this mini episode, this uncut episode, I want to dive into this. Do any of you have this experience where you get up in the morning and you're like, I just have to make it to 9 o'clock. I just have to make it to 12 o'clock. I just have to make it to 4 o'clock. And then I just have to make it to get home to my house. This to me is the epitome of sacrificial living. And dear listeners, I want to own this. I remember this in two parts of my life. One part of my life was when I had little babies in my house and I was all by myself. And I'd say, I just have to make it to 9 o'clock. Then there's a nap. I just have to make it to 12 o'clock and there's a nap. But that changed. And over time, of course, the kids grow and they start talking back to you, which was always the best part of having kids for me, was getting to know these little humans. But there have been times in my career where I have lived in that sacrificial living, sacrificing 3 hours of my life just to get to 12, just to get to Wednesday, just to get to Thursday. And I would kind of collapse in a heap at 5 o'clock until I hit this point where I was like, this is no way of living. I actually have a choice on this. And if you've listened to this podcast long enough, my mission, my reason to be here is to remind folks that transition from number two to number one allows you to be top dog in your work and life in whatever way that means for you. And so shifting my mindset and exploring, getting curious, what is it about this sort of throttling my way through the day, through my business days, and collapsing at 5 o'clock? How do I want to feel at 5 o'clock? Well, I don't want to be completely burnt out and exhausted and not be able to put a sentence together. Okay, how do you want to feel that night? Well, I don't want to go to tennis and not be able to look forward to it because I'm so freaking tired. I just want to stay home and not talk to anybody. And I had to kind of reverse engineer it, dear listeners. I had to say, okay, so what's burning me out so much? And there were two things in this sacrificial living that were coming up. One, not making enough plans during the day for breaks, for eating, for bio breaks, and for reflection. So I would end up with these meetings that were back to back to back to back. And then at the end, I'd have to scramble to get through all the follow-up from the meetings. Well, that was merely a planning problem. I needed to own my space, own my leadership, and explain that I needed to finish calls by Q2 in order to do the follow-up or whatever it was, and allowing myself back into my own work schedule. So there are definitely some of you out there that are going, yeah, that's nice, Jenny. You're an entrepreneur. I can't do that in corporate. And I say, phooey. I'll tell you why. Can start in little ways. So one of the things I started doing was allocating time for emails, just saying, I'm not going to dive into emails at the very beginning. I'm going to let those happen in the afternoon when I'm less tired. And so I would get to the meaty stuff, or the rocks, we often call them, earlier on in the day. And I wouldn't get distracted by all the little bits and pieces and the threads. That was a huge game changer for my energy. Second of all, I just made a flat out rule. I can't do more than 4 hours of calls in a row, the end. And I told my assistant and I told the people that I work with that I was unavailable for that. Crazy how simple that was, you guys. And then the other thing I really shifted my mindset on was, how do I want to feel? How do I want to show up at work? If I am charging my top dollar for my clients that I care the most about, and I say this because I really do, when I bring people into Chavender, I want them to be part of my community, then I've got to show up in that way, right? And so I don't want to show up like a 4 hour in a row coaching client or coach. I want to be in my top form all day. I want to bring my A game. And that comes with responsibility. And that responsibility is to make those concessions in my schedule and make alternate plans. The second part of sacrificial living that I want to highlight is, and I mentioned it on the podcast from last week with Jen Spiegel, this idea of two big buckets, not one. So many of us, and I know I've been guilty of this in the past, think of work as the biggest bucket. And yeah, it is a huge bucket for me. I'm a workaholic. I love my work. I'm passionate about my work. But I also want to have a really full and interesting life bucket. And that includes my family, my kids, my animals, but also the things that I want to do with my playtime. And so often I've found when I fill my life bucket, my work bucket manages itself back into its organized space. And so if you're having trouble boxing in your work bucket, making it overflows all the time, I encourage you to find something in your life bucket that forces you, whether it's a vacation, or actually in my world, what works really well is tennis, because it's a set time. I have to be on the court at a certain hour and someone's expecting me there. If tennis isn't your thing, perhaps you love going out for dinner or food. Find a place where you can book a meeting with a friend or a colleague where you have to be somewhere at some time. So I realize that it's so easy to fall back into the pattern of sacrificial living. I'm owning that while I'm talking to you, my dear listeners. But it also, all it requires of you is to notice and be aware of it. And those old habits and patterns are so, what's the word? Beguiling. They sneak up on you. They hop back into your world. I have a vacation planned for the end of this month, and I'm noticing that feeling when the calendar starts to get really, really full. And instead of just trying to pedal faster, which is sacrificial living, I invite you to think about what's most important in the next 2.5 weeks, in my case. And those habits and patterns can be interrupted. You are not the same person you were. And so I leave you with 2 questions. Number 1, if you truly loved yourself, what would you do? I often ask myself that when I look at my schedule, because I don't want to move something. I don't want to let someone down. I know I'm a people pleaser, but if I truly loved myself, would I allow myself to have this schedule? And number 2, which Jen mentioned on the podcast last week, am I making decisions from my future self instead of my current self? Oh, such good learnings. Just a reminder that all of our podcasts are now on the podcast, whatever platform you're listening to. Please do remember to hit subscribe. We are so grateful for all your reviews. I looked the other day and I couldn't believe how many reviews we had. Easiest way to make a review is to do it on your phone. You just scroll down, you'll see the 5 stars, and then below you can put in your text for your review. I am so grateful if you could do that. Let me know your feedback on these uncut versions and today's conversation about sacrificial living. Go be great, and thanks for listening.